Well, good afternoon. That little beauty just opened up this morning. Really pretty one. I'm not noticing any scent on it. We're running, oops, sorry for the close up, 81, 77%. So it's warm enough to pick up a scent if there was one probably. But just a really pretty flower. That one's in River Rock, and I noticed the one next to it is also starting to open up too. It's in both of those are in River Rock. No IDs. Anyway, I actually mixed up some fertilizer, and before I even realized, I went, well, I never even showed it. Never showed anybody what I was doing, and it was a little bit different. Nothing spectacular, but a little bit different. I'm not using my Better Grow mix, which I started using towards the middle of summer, into summer. The main reason is because it's 50% ammoniacal and 50% nitrate, which is okay, and I'm plenty warm enough in here, as you can tell. I'm plenty warm enough. My humidity is good. It shouldn't be any problem using that, but I want to use something different until I get the Excel that I'm thinking I'm going to order. This is a sample. I've shown this one before. This one's 501, and then I've got this 01010, which will give me a 51011. These are samples. That's something, free samples that a manufacturer sent me. Let me back everybody up here. You guys don't need this. Quite the close-ups. Anyway, this is all nitrate, nitrogen, 5% nitrate. The ammoniacal is 0.3%, less than 0.5%. 0.5% calcium, so very tiny little trace of calcium too. And it has boron, copper, cobalt, iron, magnesium, or manganese, molybdenum, and everything is chelated, which is great because it'll absorb at various pHs a little bit easier. You don't have to swing your pH quite as much. You still need to because orchids require it. Still need to be somewhere in the mid-6s to be safe. Same with this. This is magnesium phosphate. So this does have some magnesium in it, which I don't have in this, which will be okay. Anyway, they got CalMag, and they also got Epsom salts a couple of weeks ago, so I'm not worried about that. It's traces of it anyway. This is mainly phosphate, phosphorus and potassium. Anyway, I mixed up the rainwater had about 6 in it, and I added about 40 of the 501, and I added about 35 of this, so I ended up being, I don't know, it was somewhere around 91 parts per million, very low. And I dropped in a bunch of the phals. All the phals that I dropped in they all have leaves growing and all have spikes coming out. They're little mini ones. This one has leaves and roots growing. They all are showing various signs of growth, so I want to make sure to give them some more food too. And it's a low amount. It's less than 100 parts per million. And the pH is around 6.7, or 6.5. It was 6.5, excuse me. Lots of blooms. Lots of bloom spikes coming, just all over him. Still a bunch of blooms out here. Anyway, this is rainwater. I'm really fortunate that I can use the rainwater and collect rainwater. I can. With the rain barrels I have and that big trough that I keep outside covered, I can hold about 400 gallons of rainwater. So I think I'm very fortunate. I know a lot of people can't. A lot of people, the rainwater they have is not usable. It might be too high parts per million, or way too high, or way too low acidic, or too high acidic. Depends on where you live. And there's going to be exceptions to every rule. Tap water, you can use tap water as well. Tap water, unless you check it, you don't know. Tap water is probably going to be your least likely source of good quality water. Consider most tap water is way too high, and it contains chemicals that are usually made to kill live living organisms. So, and it's usually a high pH. Most wastewater treatment plants, acidic water rots pipes a lot faster than hard water that has calcium in it, or has a higher pH. Excuse me, not calcium, but a higher pH. So they will add different things to raise the pH, not necessarily calcium phosphate or straight calcium or magnesium like everybody thinks their tap water has. Sometimes if they're just using a calcium phosphate to buffer the water and raise the pH, it might contain some magnesium and calcium. But you don't know until you get a report from them, and sometimes it varies depending on what they're using down there, and it varies on the strength of it too. Unless you monitor your water, you don't know. Not trying to create rocket science out of it, or make it difficult, or anything. Just monitor it with a couple of cheap meters, pH and a TDS meter, which reads in parts per million, and then you know what you have. Bottled water, you can use bottled water as well, but not all bottled water is good. Again, a meter will tell you. Some of the stuff called spring water or purified water can have up to 100 parts per million in it, because they allow manufacturers add sodium salt, basically. It gives it a longer shelf life, and it adds a little bit of flavoring to the water that you don't really notice, but it's kind of an underlying palate flavoring there. And they're allowed to do that. So unless you check it, because when I got low on rainwater a year and a half ago, we had a really bad drought here, and some of the plants that I was growing, I needed rainwater for, and wasn't able to collect rainwater. Had to get bottled water, and man, it was tough for a couple of months where we didn't have any rain. But I found out real quick that the bottled water can have 90 to 110 parts per million is very, very common, and which is high. I consider you don't want to feed that much more than that anyway. If you're feeding young plants and stuff, depending on what you're feeding. But there's about 10 fowls sitting in there. Soaking. They've been soaking for about 20 minutes. I'm going to take them out and drop a few other plants in there. Again, this is under 100 parts per million. All of these guys are blooming. Let me just run where I can see it. Look at spikes, really nice root growth. New roots coming out, new leaves. If there's a reservoir nearby, or a pond, or a lake, or a stream nearby, check it. Check it with a meter. You can always filter water, through a coarse filter to remove critters and other things like that, pathogens and stuff like that. And you still may have, some really, really usable water. That one has such big roots. I'm going to put it down here. But you won't know until you check it. I wouldn't trust it. Sorry about the bump there. I wouldn't trust it unless I could check it. These guys, some of the moss left over from summertime is doing real well too, but they all have leaves growing out. Trying to keep the spikes. I'm trying to make sure they don't eat the spikes back up. They've got lots of root growth, and most of them have new spikes coming out again. So just trying to keep up on it. That one had that big new root came down, big toenail on it, right into the moss. RO system, that's another great source for water. Sorry about that, I keep banging that leg, don't I? RO systems are not as expensive as they used to be, and they even make little pitchers that you can buy now that will do a gallon or 2 gallons at a time if you have just a few orchids. And if you make a couple of gallons of RO water, every night when you go home and with your pitcher, and you're only watering every few days or so, you can collect some water real quick and have a little bit of backup if you need to. You need to be able to flush with good water, and you need to be able to feed with good water. The purer, the better. And the closer to a neutral pH of 7, or the closer you can get to water that's even a little bit below that, the better off you are. This is one of those pink girl. So very fragrant, and the leaves have a mottling in them. I think it's getting too much sun personally, too much light. Doesn't have any red coloring under it or anything like that, but it's lost a lot of the mottling. Those are damaged. It's lost a lot of the mottling. That's grasshopper damage from last summer, but I'm curious to see how the bloom comes out. Excuse me. This one is grew a keiki. This is one of 2 that grew keikis on me. and I was pumping a bunch of nitrogen to it. I'm not sure if that's what did it. I stopped the nitrogen about a month ago. The keki's still there, but it doesn't seem to be growing like it was. It seems to have stalled. But the plant is growing new leaves now and seems to be, you know, and look at the older leaf was real, when I got it, had a really poor root system. It grew that leaf, which wasn't very good, and the next one came out, was really, really nice, and now it's got this one. It also has I noticed a little spike coming out down here. Another one, so I don't know. I don't know if the keiki will stop at that point from nitrogen being cut back. Although they got a little bit of nitrogen today, I'm not feeding them high nitrogen like I was. I don't know. Work in progress. Work in progress. Still learning. This one's in spike as well. Another real pretty one too. Just crazy roots. They really seem to like the pea gravel, river rock. They just jump right down into it. Lava. I don't think I've had a fowl that just didn't go into it real easy or didn't seem to like it. This water should be around 100 parts per million. Plus it's got a little bit of residual left in it. Might be a hair over. 102. 102. I noticed this one. This one got watered earlier. This was the last leaf that was coming out of the package when I got this. This was in a bag. Brought this home. This was all twisted around the stake and everything, trying to grow, but it's still got some twist to it. But it has gotten bigger, and it started growing a new leaf here. But I noticed this. I'm not sure if that's showing up, but it's got roots coming out. Definitely got some new root growth. I can peek behind it, and there's lots of green tips back behind it also. So that one seems to have made itself at home. Really happy about that. It's a pretty one. It's a really pretty one. Now I've just got a bunch of mounts that I'm gonna, some of these smaller ones, I'm wanting to get in here, get a little bit of soap on. Nothing new. Everybody's seen all these before. I'm gonna let them sit and soak up some water. Lots of growth on them. Lots of new growth too. All of a sudden just popped up. Those are Brassavola Jimmy Cricket times BLC Myrtle Beach, which is crossed with Burdekin Storm. BLC Burdekin Storm. Pretty. This one's doing pretty good on that mount as well. It's got some new root growth down underneath it. The old roots don't ever seem to grab hold. It seems like occasionally one will grow out some extensions and grab, but it's a nice growth coming out right there. But it usually puts out new ones, and the old ones just kind of seem to hang there. I don't know. I've read before that the older roots, as they build up, leave them on there. They serve as a filter, as a mop to collect debris, to collect nutrients and stuff that filters down out of a tree. In nature, that would. Obviously, in your greenhouse or in your house, it's not going to be doing that. But in nature, that's what they say it's for. To help hold it around the root mass a little bit more. So that is definitely anchored itself back onto that one, hasn't it? Just look at the growth around that. And it happens pretty fast. It happens quicker than you think. More of these little ones that they can always get drinks. I can anytime I'm in here, I can put them in the water and let them soak. It doesn't seem to bother them. But with most of these mounts, I'm kind of getting into a routine with them right now, and they're not being watered quite as much as they were outside. But they're not growing as much. I don't think, even on keeping the temperatures warm in here, they're not having the growth right now that I had outside. Lots of roots growing still, and what little growths they had are stable and look good, and color staying on them. But nothing crazy going on right now, I'm noticing. So they haven't had anything but just straight water several times. They're going to get a little bit of nutrients. That's all I'm doing. I'm talking about some water quality and stuff like that at the same time. RO system, I mean, I'll be honest, if you can get an RO system set up, that they're not as expensive as they used to be. If you notice, most of the big greenhouses use those type of systems for purified water, unless you have access to good water or cistern or something like that. But RO systems, even if you have a pretty good sized collection, and you don't have to have it set up in your kitchen. You can have it hooked up in your garage, or you can have it mounted on a board where you can move it around and have quick disconnect couplings and use it on any faucet or any hose faucet you want. Like I said, you don't have to have it hooked up where it's visible. You can hook it up outside. Usually contains a rack with several filters on it and a hose that feeds it, coming from the cold supply or cold supply, and also the not the hot supply, cold supply, and also another hose for the drain runoff. Then another hose to collect the RO, that the RO water actually would come out. So it provides RO water, but you also get a runoff. I'm not sure what the ratio is, depends on the filters and everything. But let's say for every gallon of RO water you get, you might dump 2 gallons of water down the drain. That's kind of how those systems work, I think. I don't know if there's any of them that recirculate completely. Now you can collect that water and not just run it down the drain. You can, if you have a way to store it, use it, because you can always use it use it in your house. You can use it to water other plants with, or pets, or your yard, or anything else. But you don't have to just waste it off. I hate to just waste it, since everybody's fighting for good water. You hate to hear about anybody wasting any water. But it's important to keep searching for good quality water, and unless you have a meter, there's no way to really know. You don't want to start with water, a pH that's much higher than mid 7s. And the main reason is because your nutrient solution is what's going to drop the pH for you mainly. And that's what you need to rely on. If you use the correct nutrient solution, most of them are phosphate based. Most of them are designed for acidic plants. If it's an orchid designed fertilizer, or something that will work for orchids, it's going to have a automatic, because the phosphates and the way it's designed, it'll automatically lower or drop the pH. But they typically don't drop it much more than like 1 whole point. So if you have water that starts at a pH of 8, it might drop it to 7, but that's about as far as it's going to go. You could add a lot more fertilizer, maybe get it down low, but at that point you're becoming toxic, or your parts per million is going to be way too high. I don't mean to talk too fast. Once again, I get passionate when I talk about hydroponics. Forget what I was saying too. When you get back to mixing this, you need to start with water that has a low enough pH, because you can add a little bit of citric acid or other types of supplements to drop your pH, but you don't want to add something, or you don't want to add so much that it becomes a large part of your mix. Keep that to a tiny percentage. If you're only feeding 100 to 120 parts per million, let's say if you're only feeding 100 parts per million, I wouldn't want my citric acid to be much more than, 5 to 10 parts per million tops. Much over that, and I need to find water that's a little bit lower pH to begin with, if my mix is not dropping it enough for me to begin with. If your mix gets you into the excuse me, low to mid 6s, then you're probably okay. Because if your mix is a chelated type mix, or the supplement that you're feeding is a chelated, it's probably going to be made to feed around those ranges. It's when you start feeding things that are more nitrate based, or specifically calcium nitrate, or specific, phosphate itself, or potassium that's just by itself. A lot of kelp and seaweed mixes do better when you get those in the right pH range. Drop them down a little bit, but they typically will drop the water down enough anyway on their own, so you don't need to add something to those. But again, if you're starting with 8 and you mix up kelp or seaweed or something like that, it's probably not going to drop it down to 6.2 where you'd like to be. It's probably not, unless you're adding so much to it that it becomes, too strong of a mix, if that makes sense. So it not only has to have a low parts per million, but it has to have a pH that's closer to neutral as you can get. Closer to 7, the better. If the mixes are only dropping a point, and that's about all you really want to drop a mix, is about a point max, and I try and stay half that myself, which means I don't want to go like much more than 6. Excuse me. Hello, camera girl. Hi, I'm sitting here talking to everybody. All right. Thank you. Love you. Bye. I had that phone there for that reason. Sorry about that. And she was like, uh-oh. Anyway, I forgot what I was talking about. Anyway, you don't want to drop it much more than about 5 is myself. That's just what I like to keep it at. But if the mix doesn't drop it enough, then you're adding citric acid and it starts to become a little bit overwhelming. So you need to find water that's a little bit closer to neutral, and you need to find water that has a low parts per million to begin with, so you have room for your nutrient mix, and so that when you add your mix or whatever nutrients you're adding to it, that it has a low enough pH that it's going to be usable, and you don't have to start using a bunch of citric acid or using supplements. I use citric acid, but not all the time. Only if I'm trying to really drop it down for some reason. If I'm using calcium nitrate, it usually has to have something to drop it down. It won't drop it on its own. I don't use a lot of calcium nitrate at this point, though. Anyway, a little bit of touch on water quality. You got to find good quality water, and you don't know until you check it. I'm not trying to make it difficult. Just get a couple of cheap meters and learn how to calibrate them. Learn how to calibrate them correctly. I bought myself a couple of those little cheap meters, the $15 meters that I see a lot of everybody using. And this is not an expensive meter, this Oakton. This is about a $50, $60 meter, I think. But I get a little bit of lifetime out of these, and these are very, very accurate. I don't have any issues with them. They're easy to calibrate. And I calibrate them with 7.0 solution all the time. I keep 7.0 solution in the reservoir, and that way when I turn it on, it's always at 7, and I'm good to go. If I ever turn it on and it's off 7, I dump out the solution, put fresh solution in it, which you should do anyway. You have to fill it up occasionally, because just taking it in and out, you lose the solution. But at that point, I'll just recalibrate it, and I'm good to go again. Every once in a while, I might have to clean the tip with a butt brush, and you should do that as regular maintenance anyway. But the little cheap meters, and I'll have to do a show on those. I've got a couple of them that they won't calibrate properly. I don't know how everybody's using them, but I'm having difficulty, and I've been using meters for a long, long time, but they won't calibrate correctly for me. So I need to probably do a show on them, because if that's what everybody else is using, there might be an issue with that. They seem to be off. The difference, they are from 6.86 to mine, which is 7, which is like what, 1.4 or something. So that's what they seem to be off. And it seems like even if I calibrate them to 6.86, when I put it in my 7 solution, it still tells me it's 6.86, which it isn't. If I take my gauge, my meter, and I put it in my 7.0 solution, it tells me it's 7. And if I put it in their 6.86 solution, it tells me it's 6.85, 84, but it's really, really close. And that's probably just because my water and stuff that I was mixing with is not as good. But I don't know where I'm off. I don't know, but those meters I'm having difficulty with, and I got a feeling everybody else is too. So anyway, thanks for watching. Have a wonderful evening, and I don't know. Get out there and work with your orchids. Feed them if they need it. Have a great evening.